Welcome to this explainer. Okay, so if you've ever stared at a massive expanse of bare wood flooring, let's say like a typical 1,300 square foot project, and just felt this sudden looming wave of anxiety about how to actually price it out accurately, well, you're in exactly the right place. Today, we're taking that potentially stressful, kind of overwhelming math of a floor finishing project, and we're transforming it into a clear, predictable, profit-protecting methodology. We're literally going to build a step-by-step guide for creating a professional floor finishing quote that covers all your bases.
All right, here's our roadmap for today. 1. Estimating your team's labor. 2. Calculating stain and sealant. 3. Surface prep and porosity. 4. The 10% buffer. And finally, 5. Building the final proposal. Let's dive right in.
Section 1. Estimating your team's labor.
So pricing a job is always a balancing act between labor, materials, and overhead. But labor? Man, labor is where so many people make their very first big mistake. Because when you're working with a partner, your baseline math completely changes. Step 1 is simply estimating the days the job will take. Let's say our 1,300 square foot project takes 2 full days. Okay, simple enough. Step 2 is calculating your total man-hours. Now, because there are 2 people working an 8-hour shift over 2 days, you multiply those figures all together. Then step 3 is multiplying that total by your hourly rate. And just for context, professional service labor typically ranges anywhere from $35 to $97 per hour, depending on your experience level and, your local market.
Here is the absolutely crucial point. For our 2-day example project, you are billing for exactly 32 total man-hours, not 16. It's incredibly easy to just think, well, I'll be there for 2 8-hour days, so that's 16 hours, and completely forget to double the math for the second person on site. And if you do that, congratulations, you just agreed to work for half price. That single tiny oversight literally cuts your labor revenue in half before you even start. Moving on to Section 2. Calculating stain and sealant. Now, the specific type of stain you choose completely dictates your material volume. Let's look at the data for a roughly 1,300 square foot project. If you're applying a transparent or clear stain, you generally get about 300 square feet of coverage per gallon. So for a standard 2-coat application, you're looking at eating maybe 8 to 9 gallons total. But watch what happens if the client requests a solid or opaque stain. Your coverage drops drastically to roughly 175 square feet per gallon. Suddenly, that exact same floor requires an astonishing 15 gallons for 2 coats. That is a massive swing in material costs, and it's something you absolutely must capture in your quote. And the exact same principle applies to your sealant. Professional-grade sealants will always list their spread rates right there on the can, so always check the label. Look at a standard polyurethane, for instance. It might only get 300 square feet per gallon, meaning you'd need about 9 gallons for 2 coats on our example floor. But a higher coverage product, getting maybe 500 or 600 square feet per gallon, well, that might only require 5 or 6 gallons. Just keep in mind, you must calculate for 2 coats to ensure proper protection. And hey, your application method matters too. Using professional applicators like a T-bar or a microfiber mob generally yields much better, way more consistent coverage compared to just your standard rollers or brushes.
Section 3. Surface prep and porosity.
I want you to ask yourself this before you even think about drafting your next quote. What is the biggest profit killer in floor finishing? Seriously, take a guess. Because if you're just looking at square footage and liquid coverage, you might be walking right into a trap.
The answer is surface preparation. If the wood requires extensive sanding, deep cleaning, or structural repairs, things like filling wide cracks or dealing with heavy degradation from an old, failing finish, this quickly becomes the most labor-intensive part of the entire process. This is not just standard application time. You absolutely must charge accordingly for this prep work, or your 32-hour man-hour budget is going to completely evaporate before you've even popped the lid off a can of stain. Notice how the wood itself actually changes your quote. Surface texture and wood species matter immensely when you're estimating your volumes. Smooth, dense hardwoods like oak provide much better coverage, closer to that 300 square feet per gallon mark we talked about. On the flip side, rough sawn wood, weathered surfaces, or porous softwoods like pine or cedar, those act as what we call thirsty wood. They are highly absorbent and will easily soak up product at a rate closer to 150 square feet per gallon. So if you quote a rough pine floor using the math for a smooth oak floor, that floor is going to literally drink your profit margins right up. Application details also play a huge role in how much product actually makes it onto the floor versus how much is just consumed in the process. Like if you use a sprayer, it can lead to higher consumption if you aren't properly backbrushing. Brushes and rollers give you more control though, maybe a bit less consistency than a T-bar. And here is a fantastic pro tip straight from our sources. Remember that the first coat's main job is essentially filling the wood's pores. Because of that, the second coat usually requires about 20 to 25% less product than the first coat. Definitely something to keep in mind.
All right, Section 4, the 10% buffer.
10 to 15%. Seriously, burn this number into your memory. It is standard professional practice to purchase 10 to 15% more material than what your exact mathematical calculation demands.
Now, if you're wondering why you should always buy extra, let me clear that up. It is not about overcharging the client. It's about protecting the project. You have to account for inevitable spillage or the waste that just gets left in your tray or brush. Plus, you have to plan for absorption variances, since some specific areas of the floor might just randomly soak up more liquid than others. And above all, you need extra material on hand for touch-ups. Trust me on this one, you never ever want to run out of matching stain right in the middle of a job. It is always much safer to round up.
And speaking of materials, here is another standard industry practice, the material markup. You should be adding a 10 to 20% margin on the actual cost of your materials. Why? Because you aren't just paying for the liquid itself, you're using your valuable time to research, purchase, transport, and properly store these heavy, sensitive chemicals. Billing materials separately with a markup protects your overall profit margins, and frankly, it compensates you fairly for all your logistical efforts.
Finally, Section 5, building the final proposal.
So, here is your final breakdown. By organizing your quote into clear, distinct categories, labor, materials, and overhead, you are helping the client understand exactly where their money is going. They see the labor of 2 people multiplied by the actual hours. They see the materials, which includes the stain, the sealant, abrasives, and applicators, complete with your margin. And they see the overhead, which covers your travel, insurance, and the wear and tear on your small tools. Presenting a clean, beautifully structured table like this doesn't just look good on paper, it actively justifies the real value of your work.
But before you hit send on that final sum, do one last check for those easily forgotten hidden variables. Did you charge for consumables, like your sandpaper, drop cloths, and painter's tape? Did you evaluate the access and logistics? I mean, if the space is incredibly cramped, super difficult to move around in, or if the client needs you to do the work in stages, your timeline is absolutely going to increase. And finally, if you're stripping an old finish or creating heavy debris, you have got to factor in those waste disposal fees.
Ultimately, a really detailed quote accomplishes 2 big things. Yes, it covers your costs, but it also proves your total professionalism to the client. When they see this level of detail, they know for a fact they are hiring an expert. So I'll leave you with this question. Are you leaving your margins up to chance, or are you actually building a blueprint for success? By applying this structured step-by-step approach to your next floor finishing bid, you are guaranteeing that you, your partner, and your business get compensated exactly what you're worth. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I will catch you on the next one.